a very warm welcome to everybody who's signed up, and if any of your friends or family are interested, we'll be recording this, so it will be available hopefully at some point. So yeah, very warm welcome to the next in our series of Welfare for Wildlife webinars. So this is a joint collaboration between global animal welfare and wild welfare. So during this series we'll be promoting interest and discussion on the interface between zoos and sanctuaries, but also considering how in the modern society, you know, as well as discuss topical welfare issues, impact both, such as wildlife trade, some species specific concerns, or even things like animal training. So we'll introduce our wonderful speaker today in a few minutes, just a few Zoom admin points. So there will be the opportunity for questions today, and that will be at the end of the webinar. So you can use the Q&A box to ask questions for Jill, and then all of us as facilitators. So we've got George and Simon from Wild Welfare and myself and Anne-Marie from Global Animal Welfare. And then we'll be able to ask those questions of Jill at the end. There is a chat option also, but we're encouraging everyone to use the Q&A and only use the chat if you've got any logistical issues. And then one of us will be able to try and help you out. As I mentioned, it will be recorded, so you should have an option to say whether you don't want to be on a recording, but I think that's more for us as a panel anyway. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce you to Jill Robinson, who I'm sure most of the people signing on know about. So she is the pioneer of animal welfare in Asia since 1985, and widely recognised as the world's leading expert on bear bile industry, having campaigned against it since 1993. So Jill was born in the UK, but moved to Hong Kong in '85 and spent 12 years working for I4, International Fund for Animal Welfare. She founded Dr. Dog in 1991 as the first animal therapy programme in Asia. And since then, more than 1,000 dogs have since qualified as therapists, visiting hospitals, disabled centres, schools and elderly homes in cities across Asia. But it was in 1993 in a visit to a bear farm in China that defined Jill's future and led to her destiny, I would say, exposing the plight of endangered Asiatic black bears that are cruelly farmed for their bile extraction. And Jill has ever since been dedicated to ending the practice. And in 1998, she founded Animals Asia, an organisation that's devoted to ending bear bile farming in both China and Vietnam, and bring about long-term change for animals by promoting compassion and respect. So today, Animals Asia has rescued over 640 bears, and I really look forward to hearing more about those. And they're cared for at their award-winning bear sanctuaries in China and Vietnam. So I think I'm right in saying that they're the only sanctuaries in China and Vietnam that have been accredited by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. They signed a formal agreement with Vietnam government to end bear bile farming once and for all. On a personal note, Anne-Marie and I have had the pleasure of working with Jill for more than a decade in both Vietnam and China. And Jill has been a really good friend and mentor through those years, and has provided us with much support and guidance in establishing global animal welfare, and is now our patron. So her infectious inspiration and commitment to animal welfare has been a huge inspiration and driving force for us as well. So without further ado, it's over to you, Jill. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, guys, thank you so much. Nick, again, thank you for a lovely introduction. This is a huge privilege to be talking with everyone today, obviously about one of our favourite subjects, an Asian perspective, promoting a holistic approach to helping Asian bears. And I first of all want to pay deep credit to especially Anna Marie and Nick, that you can see here in the picture. As Nick said, we've known each other for well over a decade, and these two girls just pioneered our rescue and management programs in China and Vietnam. And I always liken it to when you move house, that you leave that house in a better condition than you found it. And that's certainly what happened with Nick and Anna Marie in terms of both sanctuaries in both countries. So I just have enormous respect for you two, and especially now that you've partnered with Wild Welfare. So we've obviously got George and Simon, and of course Jake and team. You guys are trailblazing now responsible management and care in sanctuaries, and I just hope that everyone who's got the inclination to want to see sanctuaries improved go straight to these experts, because the experts that they are indeed. This always makes me really laugh, because it just reminds us of any one of us sitting here watching the presentation, and probably anyone, you know, the audience is watching it too. It's a short and sweet analogy of how much we love our bears. You know, I've loved animals actually before I could say the word animal, and as this rather grotty picture shows, I've loved bears since I was a very young child. I'm completely monopolizing not only my own bear, but my very patient sister's bear as well. But on to more serious things. As Nick just alluded to, my love affair with bears really began from this second in 1993. I'd already been working for the International Fund for Animal Welfare for many years, and I got a call from a friend of mine who was a journalist, and he'd just come back from a bear bar farm in China, and he called me up and said, you've got to go and see this place. And it just piqued my interest, because I'd heard a little about bear bar farming, but I certainly didn't know much about the subject, and I certainly knew nothing about the species of Asiatic black bears. So I grabbed a couple of friends of mine, we went over the border, we found the bear farm, joining Japanese and Taiwanese tourists. And as the tourists were being sort of persuaded, if you like, to buy bear bile in the shop, we snuck away from the group, because we'd been told where they kept the bile extraction bears themselves, where tourists weren't allowed to go. We found these steps into a basement, and we came across what I've always called ever since my own living hell. It was something that I wasn't prepared for. I'd never seen anything like this before in my life. And it was with deep shock that I was just looking at 32 moon bears in these tiny wire cages with terrible injuries to their bodies, and not least metal catheters protruding from their abdomens from where their bile was being drained. And as I was walking around, I felt something touch my shoulder, and I realised instantly that I'd backed too closely into a cage. I turned around in shock, and instead of being hurt, there was just this female moon bear with her paw stretched through the bars of the cage. And I did something ridiculously stupid. I took it. You know, we would never do that today, and I would be fired by Nick and Anna Marie if I did do that on site. But, you know, again, I knew nothing about the species, and this bear was obviously, you know, just curiously putting her paw out. And the most obvious thing to me was just to take her paw, and she just squeezed my fingers, and we lost a moment in time. I can only say that, as we looked into each other's eyes. And I knew inherently that everything would change from that second. It did change. I never saw her again. I went back a couple of years later to try and find her, but the farm had disbanded, and I don't know what happened to the bears. And I always say to this day, I hope she's passed away, because I can't bear the fact that she's still suffering all these years later on a bear bar farm somewhere. But this one bear just literally began everything. She began the dream of the China Bear Rescue. She began the development of sanctuaries in China and Vietnam. And she was responsible for the saving and the rescuing of over 640 pool party loving bears ever since. But as Nick and Anna Marie know, there's a long journey from, you know, circumstances like this, where we see the bears on the farms, to circumstances like this, where we can rescue them. And this journey of all of ours, you know, has been challenging, it's been stressful, it's been frustrating, but it's been deeply satisfying too. And this is something that I'm immensely proud to be part of today, and indeed to have our team with us too. So for those of you that are not au fait with bear bar farming, just really quickly, it began in the early 1980s in North Korea, believe it or not, where a technique was honed to farm bears in cages and extract their bile. China quickly took up this technique because they were seeing a significant number of their wild bears being caught in the wild, of course, and killed for their whole gallbladders, which are termed liquid bags of gold for the bile that these gallbladders contain. And they realised that as an endangered species, this wasn't sustainable. So they quickly took over the practice of bear bile farming. And began to farm thousands of bears, and we actually don't know the number of bear farms or bears across the Asia continent, but it runs into many thousands of bears. And you know, despite the best intentions, whatever they were, of people farming bears to protect bears in the wild, again, this just doesn't pan out as they hoped, because bears, of course, are being still taken from the wild to supplement the numbers of animals on the farms that are dying as a result of the gross cruelty and the bile extraction methods itself. So you can see this poor guy in Vietnam that's missing a limb from being caught illegally in the wild in a leg hold trap. This is all particularly sad, considering that for many years, actually decades, we've been working again with the traditional medicine discipline in both China and Vietnam, and we are told time and time again that there are responsible herbal alternatives and indeed synthetic alternatives to take the place of bear bile today. In China there's 54 different herbal alternatives, in Vietnam there's 32, and so we always say that no one is going to die for the lack of bear bile today. So it's important for us now to get out there in the community with programs that show, again, as I said at the beginning, a holistic approach to ending bear farming. You can't just point your finger at communities or government officials, of course, in China or Vietnam. You know, this has to be a persuasive argument covering a lot of different areas that I'll talk you through about now. So one of those areas is working responsibly with the authorities. And you might ask what human-bear conflict mitigation has to do with ending bear bile farming. Well, quite a lot, really, because we want to try to work with the authorities, especially here in China, to help protect not just bears, but the local community as well, and build up a trust, if you like, between them, between the community, between the government, towards bears in the wild. We supply the uniforms, for example, for bear biologists and field rangers. We supply infrared cameras so that they can go out there and track, you know, the number of bears and where they are out in the wild, and if they're coming into human habited areas, or I should say that human habited areas are encroaching into wild areas, as we know, and that's where the conflict is arising. But if we can work with these people, if we can fund the projects that also sees them go out into the local community with questionnaires, etc., they can, you know, set the camera traps, they can determine where and how the bears are present in the community, then we can start working ultimately with the authorities on programs of conflict mitigation and continue building up that trust with the government authorities as we go along. You might also ask, what does poverty alleviation have to do with bear farming? Pretty much nothing, if I have to be honest, but at the same time it builds up our relationship with government departments, and this is particularly important because bear bile farming in China is still a legal industry. It's totally legal there. So we have to work very, very sensitively in that country. And one of the ways that we can do that, again, is to help government officials to perhaps go out there in programs of public education with not just, you know, kids in schools, universities, but with the impoverished community as well. So we can help develop libraries, as you can see here, with bookshelves of books that are full of information about conservation and animal welfare. So at the same time, we're encouraging, you know, a whole group of little ambassadors to grow up fully knowledgeable about the issues of conservation, the environment, the animal welfare, of course, as well. So it's a really nice rounded programme that shows the government that we care about people, again, as much as we care about the bears. Out in the local community, we have a lot of public education programs. You can see all these different areas here. And, you know, especially during our anniversary every year, we go all out, which is on August the 8th, 1998, when we founded. So it's all the 8s and all the 9s, very, very auspicious numbers in terms of, you know, Chinese numbers. And just going into the community, again, we have to be quite sensitive, but we can show our mascot like Mooney there, with that lovely yellow crescent. That's why they're called moon bears, for those of you that don't know. But he also has a band-aid on his tummy that you can see there, and that gives us a perfect introduction about, you know, the fact that bear farming does hurt Asiatic black bears and sun bears, of course, and brown bears actually as well. And we can start the conversation there gently and delicately with the local community and bring them on side in terms of, you know, being persuasive to buy the herbal alternatives again to bear bile, and address demand reduction as we go along. Of course, as I said, in the schools and universities, this is really important, to be talking to kids out there in the community and getting their buy-in, if you like, of why it's so important to protect bears in our community for their own sakes, rather than how they can, you know, help humankind, for example. And there's nothing like having them on site, as both Nick and Anne-Marie know. It's just a wonderful, wonderful celebration of seeing bears out there in the enclosures, making choices for the first time in their lives, and having kids really up close and personal through that chain link fencing, that they can really get an understanding of why we should be moving away from practices like bear bar farming today. So again, to be holistic and to understand bear farming, of course we have to understand the bears, and we have to rescue the bears as well. And this is what we do and have done since day one. And I have to say, phenomenally well as well. You know, again, thanks to people like Anne-Marie and Nick that have been working with us, you know, for well over 10 years to get to this stage where we're confident in rescuing bears. And of course, I should pay huge tribute to Heidi, that's taken over from Anne-Marie in Vietnam and her team, and also Ryan, who's taken over from Nick in China as well with his team there. We are so proud and privileged to be having, you know, such a knowledgeable and professional team to be doing rescues like this. And this is quite a notable rescue that you might have seen pop up on Facebook and social networks over the last couple of weeks, since we actually moved 101 bears from a bear farm, an ex-bear farm in Nanning, to our sanctuary in Chengdu. You can see young Lee up the top there on top of the cage. And you've got Ryan there that I've just been speaking about on the right of the picture, encouraging the bear into this transport cage so that we can get them on the way to Chengdu and out of Nanning forever. But just to put this into context, this is what an ex-bear bar farm looks like. Actually, it's much cleaner than an ex-bear bar farm is, and this obviously was in the early days when Nick and team were, you know, on site, and Ryan since and his team, making at least those sheds somewhat cleaner than we found them in, the condition we found them in. Generally, you see anything under those cages, obviously feces and urine, but, you know, blood and pus and vomit and goodness knows what, you know, that show the reality, I'm afraid, of this industry. But this shed, there's 3 sheds in Nanning that we were dealing with, as Nick knows only too well. Yeah, they needed a lot of work. And, you know, it's only now that you can see the food bowls are lined up there neatly, etc., after the teams got there. But to start the story, the gentleman in the middle is Mr. Yan, who is wearing the orange polo shirt. And in 2013, he called Animals Asia because he'd just taken over as manager of the horticulture centre in Nanning that just so happened to contain a bear bar farm as well. And as a practicing Buddhist, he was extremely upset. He abhorred animal cruelty, as did his daughter, his young daughter. And so together they felt that he just wasn't comfortable in managing a bear bar farm. So he got in touch with Animals Asia and he asked us to come over and assess the farm and consider whether we would turn that bear bar farm into a sanctuary. And of course, we immediately said yes. You can see Nick in the front of the picture. And, you know, we had every intention of doing that. But over the next few months, I would say that red tape and a lot of problems really presented themselves. And to cut a long story short, we decided after a while that there was no way we could turn that farm into a sanctuary. And we asked if we could please take what were then 132 bears back to our sanctuary in Chengdu. And Mr. Yan very enthusiastically agreed. And so that was our remit from 2014, that we would do just that. Once again, we got beset by red tape and a lot of issues, because the horticulture centre kept being taken over by different corporate businesses, and so every time it was taken over, we had to go back to square one in applying for the permits, and it just got so difficult, and it just took the most inordinate amount of time. Until, you know, we finally got to the stage where we could actually get permission to move the bears. But in the meantime, what I'm coming to is that we got so many people on site. You know, Nick had brought in brilliant teams. They were there the whole time. She had to split the teams to look after the bears. So you got half of them in Chengdu, half of them in Nanning. It was the most difficult time for her, and now for Ryan after he took over as well. But we did have some fabulous people on site, and one of those that you can see there is the glorious Leslie Nichol, Mrs. Patmore from Downton Abbey, who visited us a couple of times and just really lifted the team when we needed lifting. So lots of memories there, which I don't have time to go into. But again, you know, it's some of the memories are better than others, and it was the most difficult time, I would say, in the whole history of Animals Asia. And you know, Nick has got lovely blonde hair there, but I think it went several shades grayer by the time we'd finished there. And but you know, some of the rewarding things were obviously, you can see her hand feeding Smudge there, who, you know, we had everything from adults to juveniles to teeny tiny cubs, and that was our remit, to try to keep these bears as healthy as we could while we were applying for those permits over those 8 long years. There's bears like Derek, who was named by Ricky Gervais, obviously comedian and actor. And he was in a mess. You can see there, he had, you know, his tongue was hanging out perpetually because he was detoothed. So it clearly must have caused some degree of nerve damage in his tongue. He had terrible problems with his eyes, which later both needed to be removed. He'd been declawed, he was skeletally thin. But, you know, again, over the years, the team really performed miracles. And you can see he's a very different bear on the right there. Now, yes, I'll admit, he's a little bit roly-poly. We call these bears our square bears when they get a tiny bit obese. But in our defence, this is probably during a period of hyperphagia, when they're eating as much as they can in preparation for their winter dormancy, and there's not much space to exercise there as well. But you can see at least the difference in his body condition, his coat condition. He just looks a completely different bear, and obviously a bear that enjoys his food too. So over that period, you know, the bears, they were in the crush cages on the farm, but they also had access, which they weren't always given access to before we came along, to little outside den areas, which again, Nick and now Ryan and team upgraded to make it more comfortable for the bears. So they were able to fit small paddling pools, small hammocks, and you can just see, you know, the sheer delight those bears got out of these very small steps forward to enrich them and give them better meaning to life. I think the main thing that everyone was concerned about was that the bears just took great delight in destroying everything as well, because they're just so naturally mischievous and curious. So it was, you know, a lot of hard work for the teams to just keep everything repaired as well when the bears smashed them to smithereens. But finally, in April of this year, we got the green light, thankfully, to move those bears. And this was the most amazing journey. I'm sick to my stomach that I couldn't go on any one of those 3 phases, the 3 trips to move those bears back to Chengdu because of COVID restrictions. I just wasn't allowed to go into China. So it was incredibly frustrating for me looking, but it was incredibly satisfying too, for everybody in the organisation and our supporters, if you saw it too. It was phenomenal. You know, it was, as I say, 750 miles per trip. 25 trucks in total, bringing 101 bears home. I don't think you can imagine the logistics, not at all. You know, 36 bears each in the truck on the first 2 phases, 29 bears on the last phase. Just keeping those bears safe and happy, and, you know, for literally about 50 hours from the time that they were loaded into the cage for the time they were unloaded the other end. The professionalism of the team, and I pay great tribute to Ryan Sukot and the team who headed this up there. phenomenal job. Not one single member of staff, not one single bear was hurt or injured or anything, you know. And these, you know, you can see the crush cages where the bears are kept on the farm. So they had been encouraged to look at these cages as something you know, positive. So they'd been fed in these cages, so good things were happening. And now they were supposed to be encouraged into transport cages as well. So to move from one cage to another cage with positive reinforcement and the use of scaffolding. Believe it or not, everything that they hadn't, you know, experienced before took the training from weeks and weeks beforehand to get them comfortable to go into those cages. So it was a and then forklift trucks, for goodness sake, to move them off of those cages onto the ground, and then from the ground back into the trucks as well and homeward bound. So just incredible. Even, you know, oh, I was going to say as well, the even stopping along the way for food stops. Of course, we got lots and lots of nosy neighbours, lots of people coming over to see what all the fuss was about when they heard that there were actually bears in these trucks as well. And between feeding, we didn't take our eye off the ball. You know, everyone was looking at the CCTV cameras. So again, even though I couldn't be there, I was very privileged to take shifts as well on the CCTV, as was Jen, our remote vet as well. It was just everybody pulling together, and it was a great joy to be able to watch those bears. You know, some of them, like Bunny there, absolutely chilled as you like, just lying back on a bed of straw. Others more stereotypic, and some of them, you know, needing medicine to calm them down as we stopped at food truck stops again. But everybody just looking at these bears very, very closely until finally we got them back to Chengdu, as you can see there, and 30 days quarantine. And some of them even had access to the outside enclosure during quarantine if they had smaller enclosure areas too. So bears like Christiane, who belongs to the lovely Chris Coldrick, it's just a lovely example of the joy of these bears once they came back to Chengdu. So immediately going into their den areas, making nests with mountains of straw. We call them their straw castles because they just couldn't get enough of this. And then when they got led outside, this is a gloriously beautiful picture, again, of Christiane, where the first thing that they did, several of them, was just dig. And anyone that's working in bear conservation and welfare will know that a bear's love of foraging and digging is probably the #1 priority for them. And in doing so, you know, they're the keystone species. They're aerating the forest. A healthy forest and healthy rivers, you know, very often means healthy bears are in the region as well. So we just love that, you know, their first inclination was to get out there in the enclosure and dig. No matter how damaging it was, we didn't care at all. So my tribute to our nanning heroes for finally doing this. I'm only sorry you're missing from the picture, Nick, because you belong there as well. But you can imagine the celebration when we got these guys home. Another celebration, Vietnam, of course, and as Anna Marie knows only too well, this is one of our founding goals that was achieved in 2017, when we agreed with the Vietnam government in a memorandum of understanding that we would work together to end bear bar farming once and for all. And this was something, again, that has been on our radar for many, many years, since the late 90s, when we first, before Animals Asia, just about when Animals Asia was founded, to go out there and investigate these farms. And this is a typical method of bile extraction in Vietnam. So the bears are anaesthetized illegally with ketamine, so the horse drug, which is not allowed in Vietnam. It renders the bear you know, unconscious, except, or anaesthetized, except very often they're not using it appropriately. So, you know, sometimes they have to tie the bears down with rope, they have to hold them down, for example, and all this while they're finding or trying to locate the gallbladder with the help of an ultrasound machine, and sticking in a 6-inch spinal needle just to make sure that they've hit the gallbladder. When they think they've done that, they'll take the needle out of the sheath and they'll lick it to ensure that they've reached the bitter tasting bile inside the gallbladder. And then when they're reassured, they'll put the needle back into the sheath and they'll withdraw about 100 cc's of bile. So I just want to show a really, really, like, 10-second video. So welcome to the world of bear farming. But you know, things have changed dramatically in Vietnam, and I just really want to reassure everyone watching this that, you know, people always say, yeah, but what about the government, and you know, are they really sincere? Yes, they absolutely are. This is a picture of quite recently of government officials there at tourist hotspots handing out leaflets asking that tourists do not go to bear farms now because to take bile would be illegal. And you know, again, I've been there since the 90s when several, actually many government officials were indeed bear bile farmers too. So things have changed a lot over these years and the government really are sincere. So is the traditional medicine community. You know, years ago, of course, they would be prescribing and selling bear bile, but today we have come into an agreement with them that by the end of last year they would no longer prescribe or sell bear bile, and at that point last year there was only 5% of their membership still doing that, and they promised that that would end by last year. So this is a group of about 70,000 members across the country, and you can see the elderly lady with the pink shirt is holding our herbal alternative to bear bile book in Vietnamese, and the lovely looking lady in the purple shirt is holding a sample of the alternative, the herbal alternative to bear bile, which we produce and package up and then give to the doctors so they can hand out at these traditional medicine clinics that they invite the local community along to talk about bear bile and how, again, easy and cheaply it can be replaced. We also work with the doctors on the gardens, the herbal alternative gardens, and so far Tuan Bendixson, our fantastic Vietnam director, which I'm sorry, I omitted to show you him in the picture, but I'll show you in a second. He has got the agreement with the government and the schools, and you know, across the country we've got 13 of those herbal gardens set up now as well. So this is part and parcel of the holistic approach in ending bear farming. Of course, the main thing to end bear farming, excuse me, is to help the bears themselves and rescue them. And you know, the government have always been saying to us, we will close the farms, we want to end bear farming, but we have nowhere to put the bears. So this is our challenge now in the next few years, to be building our second sanctuary in Vietnam. And it's a massive task that we've undertaken. Our first sanctuary there is in Tam Dao National Park in the north there. And our second sanctuary is going to be in Bac Ma. Tuan Bendixson went to all these other parks with the authorities until they decided on Bac Ma, because the terrain is very similar to Tam Dao, the weather's very similar. There's just lots of good things that led to that final decision of Bac Ma National Park. And there's about 400 bears, probably less than that now, that need to be rescued, and our sanctuary can hold 3 of them, or it's 300 of them it's being built to hold. And I would say that the time the sanctuary is built, you know, by the time that we've rescued all the bears, there probably would be about 300 owing to a natural attrition rate, etc., etc. So again, hats off to Heidi and team who are doing a huge amount of capacity training on site. And one of those training is to teach interns, veterinary interns in the country, because ultimately in about 5 years' time of overseeing the new sanctuary, we want veterinary interns and a truly Vietnamese staff to be overseeing the whole facility. So for now, of course, our experts on site will be going over there to work with the training, but ultimately that will be less and less trips over the years until finally the Vietnamese team will be heading this up solely on their own. So it's a great incentive for all of them, you know, to be doing this, and something we're really excited about. And so there you've got Heidi in the middle that I've just been talking about, Jens to her left, sorry, to her right, and then we've got Tuan on the right of the picture there as well. And you know, again, these are people that have driven this campaign in Vietnam to the point where we are today. It's in extraordinarily good hands. And the other point of putting heroes here is actually to pay recognition to the bear farmers, and that's what we've got in the middle, the bear farmer and his wife, who freely gave up their bears. And this is what we want to be encouraging countrywide, not to be pointing fingers, not to be leveraging criticism on these people, but to show that bear farming can be ended kindly. Actually in Vietnam, you know, many of the farmers are very, very rich. I would say the majority of them, according to Tuan, if you go to the local villages and you see the best house, that normally belongs to a bear farmer. So what we want to try to do is just encourage them now to do the best by the bears, the very best by the bears, and give them up once that second sanctuary is built. And, you know, we look to people like you to raise a huge amount of money. I mean, this is going to cost us millions and millions of US dollars to do this. But if we don't do this, we're not going to bring bear farming to an end. So you can see the incentive that we've got right there. And I would say certainly an incentive for Tuan is to have the support of fantastic celebrities like Maggie Q. She's gorgeous. She's an A-lister, you know, Hollywood star. She's starred with Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. She's designated survivor, dramas, etc., etc. She's wonderful. She's been out several times to see us in Vietnam, and she loves Animals Asia and she loves Tuan. And she said at an event one day that Tuan made her proud to be Vietnamese, and he blushed as red as the bright red socks that he always wears. We are so blessed. You know, we've got fantastic celebrities that I'll be quickly showing you in a while. Ricky Gervais, Olivia Newton-John. Oh gosh, the names escape, sorry. It's just, we're just very, very lucky. These are our ambassadors in the UK, because I'm talking to you in the UK. And again, we're just so proud. We've got the wonderful Rick Wakeman, rock god, on the left of the picture there, who's just been awarded a CBE this week in the Queen's Birthday Honours List. We've got the phenomenal Peter Egan in the middle there, who we first were introduced to many years ago and just took the bears so deeply into his heart as well, and has been out to see us, of course, in Chengdu as well. And he introduced us to Leslie Nichol, again, another great friend. I love the bones of this woman, who obviously has been out to Nanning, as we said before, Mrs. Patmore, Downton Abbey. And last but definitely not least, my heroine, my personal heroine, Virginia McKenna, who founded Born Free, starred in the film of the same name, and gosh, 28 years ago, really was responsible for finally Animals Asia being founded, when she said just 3 words to me when I asked her whether I should start an organisation: just do it. And that's where we are today. So yeah, we're so lucky. And you know, we've got, apart from obviously people celebrities, we have bear celebrities as well. Every single bear that we rescue, for those of you following the social networks today, another 4 have just been rescued in Vietnam. It's just wonderful news to see that, those bears rolling through the gates of the sanctuary. There is no feeling in the world like it, to take bears from terrible conditions like this on the left with Tuan, no free access to food and water, no toys to play with, no straw to lie on, barren enclosures, barren cages, sometimes with no access to sunlight, sometimes with access to too much sunlight all the day on their bodies. So it never changes until they get finally back to the sanctuary and they can explore the great outdoors. As I said to you, we have teeny tiny cubs that we rescue very often at this time of year, and this was the beautiful Air Manang last July, after they were recently rescued. So terrified, you know, they'd obviously seen their mother killed in front of their eyes, and they were smuggled out, you know, for the trade. And it just takes everything from just a terrifically kind and you know, professional team to give these bears their life of just never looking back and trusting again the human species that's caused them so much harm. So we've got M in the front there, we've got Anne at the back, and you know, over the months after rescuing them, they did grow in confidence, maybe a little bit too much, as this video clip shows. You have to look at it quite quickly. It goes quick. This is one of those videos that you have to watch twice. But I do, again, want to pay enormous tribute to Anna Marie and to Nick for, you know, really setting the bar on animal sanctuaries and the professionalism and the kindness that they've shown. And again, just to reinforce that, you know, if you do know of sanctuaries that need help, please point them in the direction of global animal welfare and of course wild welfare as well, because these are people that I said before are just trailblazing a wonderful, wonderful movement of responsible bear care and professional management as well. I can't say that high enough, and I'm so personally thrilled that they have gone out there, you know, into that international arena and set up their own organisation, because it is the very, very best thing for bears and of course many, many other wild species alike as well. So I just wish you guys every success that you deserve, because you certainly raise the bar at our sanctuaries as well. So between us, you know, just in the last couple of minutes, we do go all out to understand their past, and you don't need to be a professional like Nick and Anne-Marie to realise that there is an incredible difference between these two pictures. Sweet Murphy, as he was confiscated from the trade, and now today an absolute delinquent of a bear, destroying everything in his whirlwind wake. We take them from the agony of things like dental problems, you know, when they arrive with us with their teeth smashed from bar biting, or even deliberately moved to make them removed, to make them less dangerous, to extract their bile. And so, you know, give them that contentment of being able to enjoy their food for the first time in their lives. We take them from cages that have crushed their bodies and crushed their souls to animals again that, you know, have freedom of choices. And, you know, I know that Nick and Anne-Marie's eyebrows are up to the ceiling, I'm sure, because I'm showing a very special bear called Jasper. Well, it's my presentation. So Jasper was an extraordinary bear. He was in that crush cage for 15 years, and then he was out in the enclosure in China for another 15 years before he passed away a couple of years ago. And he, like every single other bear, has a story to tell. You know, I always called him the peacemaker of the sanctuary, because he would always break up the odd disagreement between bears. He was a photo bomber as well. He would, you know, we would often get journalists, as they were taking pictures of all the enclosures, they'd come up at the end of the day and say, yeah, we took some great pictures, but there's always one bear that got in front of all the other bears. And we'd go, yeah, we know. So, did he have yellow eyebrows? And they say, yeah. We say, right, that was Jasper. And if ever I was in a, you know, a bad place, I would always just go on the walkie-talkie and say to everyone, I'm closing off for a while. I'm going to go and have a meeting with Jasper. And I know that, you know, Nick did the same with Bodo on site, and Marie, I don't think you're going to deny having favourites. You know, it's impossible not to, but just the exquisite difference in their characters and personalities makes you love every single one of them. We give them, you know, help to show that disabilities, you know, are no impediment to enjoying their lives in the great outdoors. You've got the beautiful Vandrew in Vietnam on the left of the picture there, with his whole limb missing from the shoulder, caught in a leg hold trap, of course. And then you've got Freedom, bless her, she died as well a few years ago, but she was missing both of her front paws from being caught in leg hold traps. But she had multiple boyfriends, believe you me, and she had just the best life out there as well. And of course, finally, at the end of their life, or indeed sometimes at the beginning of their rescue, we give them that blessed release that they deserve. You know, when we haven't been able to help bears when they've come straight from farms and they've been too far gone for us to do anything else but say a respectful goodbye. So we must have about 300 bears in both sanctuaries now over these last years since 2020 that we've said goodbye to as well. So finally, again, as I keep reinforcing, you know, our work is done purely with kindness. And I just think that all of us need to reflect on how we're living our lives, and the fact that being unkind to animals, you know, has got us in the most terrible scrapes. So COVID, of course, number one, and many, many other disease that has come about purely because of our mistreatment of animals, and we have to do things differently now. And I just think it's inherent on all of us to maybe wake up in the morning and just think simply, what can I do to be kind? It doesn't even have to be to an animal, you know, to anyone or anything, just as long as we are thinking of our lives kindly in the years ahead, because, you know, we have, as we know, other diseases and, you know, other pandemics waiting in the wings unless we do change. So we're incredibly blessed to have all of these celebrities that are joining us, and I want to play you a quick 2-minute video that many of you probably have seen in the past, but just shows how celebrity is important, but how these guys are the real deal in helping us. And this is headed up, of course, again by Ricky Gervais.
This terrible predicament we find ourselves in, the heartbreaking loss of human life, stems directly from the mistreatment of animals, and the only cure is kindness.
The virus
is the latest chilling example of the consequences
of a systemic disregard for the myriad
of species and ecosystems
that sustain the health of this planet. We've not been kind to the earth,
to her animals or her environment.
but just look what happens when we're forced to stop.
The pollution lifts,
The air becomes cleaner, the water clearer. We hear birds song in the cities.
we see wildlife roaming through the undisturbed environment.
Marine life playing in silent shipping lanes.
and in response to this tragic and preventable
The loss of human life
we start to rediscover
What is important?
What is of real value?
our health.
and our humanity.
Everybody is looking for a cure.
But this one virus, it's just a symptom of the bigger disease.
And we have an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Not go back to the way things were. To walk away from the cruelty that led us here. To create a better,
Healthier world for ourselves.
and all the species we share it with.
If we want to find a solution to the problems that we're facing,
We have to look for more than a single vaccine for a single virus.
We have to solve the root cause of this crisis.
and the only cure,
And the only cure
The only cure
Only cure.
is kindness.
is kindness. It's kindness.
Is kindness.
And the only cure,
Only cure.
And the only cure
Is kindness.
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 kindness. Kindness.
Kindness. It's kindness.
Kindness.
The only cure is kindness. This terrible predicament.
So from people celebrities, of course, to animal celebrities, and who better than Hector to say, you know, again, on behalf of all of us at Animals Asia, thank you, Global Animal Welfare, Wild Welfare, and of course everyone listening in today. Please hop on our website, help us with that Vietnam sanctuary, because with your help we can really finally end the industry once and for all in Vietnam, and I think show a terrific landscape to other bear farming countries, how to do this respectfully, how to do this kindly. So our gratitude from all of us to show the way forward, that the only cure is, of course, kindness. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jill. Oh gosh, the tissues are out again. Yeah, wonderful, and very poignant in terms of the only cure is kindness. And I'm super proud to have played a small part in it all. But we've had some wonderful questions, so hopefully try and get through them all. So first one, has the work with the authorities in Vietnam been smoother than China, would you say? So because it's illegal to farm and trade bear bile in Vietnam, and has this made the work easier for Animals Asia?
That's a good question. Easy is a really difficult adjective to to say, because again, the early days in Vietnam were difficult, because remember, again, as I said, there were government authorities, officials that were bear bile farmers. And I don't think, you know, it has to be said, a lot of those early days we weren't taken seriously. But I think there's a lot, you know, the more we sort of put our money where our mouth is, that, you know, when we built the sanctuary, for example, that was a big indication to the Vietnam authorities that we were serious, and also inviting them to China. You know, we had you know, a group of them that we brought over to see the sanctuary in China and gain trust that way as well. So I think now we're on the final hurdle. Yes, it is easier, of course, because we have got the full, you know, support of the Vietnam authorities, and because as well we've been able to do this holistically, you know, with the traditional medicine, with demand reduction, with the local community, with, you know, even bringing in local community staff as well, not to mention construction materials, food, medicines, you know, all the other things, to show that this is a, you know, a completely country-driven, local Vietnam-driven campaign that we're working on. So it's almost like we are on the home run now, and that makes it really, really satisfying. And I hope that those ripple effects will spread, you know, more into China, where obviously the industry is legal there, but show, you know, an appropriate landscape of how we can work together to protect bears there as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned it during the presentation that you were unable to get to the mainland for the most recent rescue from Nanning. So are COVID-19 restrictions likely to allow you to return to China anytime soon?
I just learned yesterday, read the South China Morning Post, that it seems no, not anytime soon, not this year. Maybe at some point next year. There's still no indication that China's being extremely cautious, and I can't blame them for that. I cannot, you know, with people sort of so condensed, you know, they are going all out to make sure that this terrible virus doesn't spread in that country. So it's been a source of great sadness, I have to say, because we have lost bears along the way. We've lost our dogs along the way. You know, one of my dogs, beloved dogs, Tojai. It's hard to reflect that the last time I saw them was the last time I saw them. So yeah, it's you know, I miss them, and but I have to say that, you know, the missing is one thing. The fact is that they are continuing in the most wonderful way there, you know, so they certainly don't need me there, you know. We might like to be together, but it's not a necessity that I am there.
I've often reflected on how it must be for the team being there through this time without the opportunity to leave as well, and that's a challenge in itself, you know. I mean, there's a huge team of committed people, but when you know you can't actually leave, that's also a massive thing.
It's a really good point, Nick. That's a really good point. In both China and Vietnam, they definitely struggle with that because they can't leave to go back to their families wherever, in the UK or Australia, USA, etc., etc. It's horrible, you know. But that, my goodness, if ever a team knuckled down, you know, and just with a can-do attitude, it's the teams in both countries. And again, you know, kudos to, again, Heidi and Ryan for heading those teams up and for, you know, lifting people's spirits along the way.
That's no mean feat under those pressures. Another question. So there's a comment with it. Amazing work on ending the use of bear bile in traditional medicine. How often are the traditional medicine clinics monitored or inspected, if at all, by government officials?
Oh, that's a really good question. Our team go along to the clinics all the time. They go to every single one. But in terms of how many government officials are there, you know, I don't know. I have to ask Tron about that. It's really the local community, you know, that comes along in droves. They even bring children, by the way. I forgot to mention that. They have kids' corners, so that, you know, because it's usually over a weekend. So the families bring the kids along, and the kids need something to, you know, sort of keep their attention going. So they have lots of books and reading materials that are geared to educate the children as well. But in terms of government, yeah, I actually don't know how many government officials go to those clinics.
Yeah, it's a good question. What would you say does success look like for you? For example, when all the bear farms are closed, when countries recognise animal welfare as a priority, or when all animals have the opportunity to live lives unimpeded by humans?
Oh, what a great question. All three things. You know, our founding goals, you know, to end bear farming was to end the consumption of cats and dogs in China and to create a better world for captive animals in Asia. And when you think that, you know, one of our founding goals in Vietnam has been achieved, tick, ending bear farming there. In China, the sale of dogs and cats for consumption is now an illegal practice. Yes, you're going to see maybe Yulin going ahead this year, but it is illegal to do so. It's just that, you know, the industry is pushing back, and you know, some government officials are tolerating things like that, but our team are working very hard in the field to report restaurants and markets and slaughterhouses that are selling dogs and indeed cats. And some of these facilities are many of these facilities are being closed down now, told to stop selling. So, you know, in a nutshell, that, you know, we take the successes where we can. You know, I realise that, you know, was it Rudyard Kipling that said, you know, never hurry the East? Was it him? I forget. Anyway, and it's true, you can't hurry the East, but, you know, the fact that these major hurdles have been overcome is really deeply satisfying, and we just take those successes and it gives us momentum and optimism for more.
Mm-hmm. What role do you think the developments in welfare science over the past couple of decades have had in changing attitudes to bear welfare in China and Vietnam, indeed across Asia? Is this less important than social science issues, diplomacy, community engagement, etc.? Another really good question.
Wow, that is. You know, oh gosh, I don't know where to start with this one. You know, let me just give you an example, actually, not with bears, but with dogs and cats, because for years we spoke about welfare in China, pretty much only in terms of how the dogs and cats were killed and how they were kept and how they were transported and caged, etc., etc. And then we realised that, you know, like in many other countries, UK, America, everyone doesn't agree on animal welfare. People just don't, you know. So to make our argument more compelling, we gradually began to realise that we had to bring in more arguments, different arguments. And one of those was showing that the cross-border transport, for example, of dogs and cats was a perfect vector for the transmission of diseases, including rabies. So we were able to prove that categorically by getting rabies samples from the slaughterhouses and showing that dogs were indeed rabies positive, and that the meat of these animals was being shipped illegally across the country. We were also able to show the government that the stealing of these animals, which was in nearly 100% of cases for the dog trade, was causing great social disharmony in the country. And everyone got that. Everyone got that your private property was being stolen. So even if you were sitting on the fence on animal welfare and you didn't really agree with it, or you didn't care about cats and dogs, you did care about social harmony and say, yeah, that's not right. People shouldn't have their property stolen. So, you know, in terms of the, you know, bear welfare, I suppose, you know, again, it's just sort of picking areas where we can show the government and the community that, you know, things can and should change. And that, as I said at the beginning of this, no one is going to die for the lack of bear bile. We know that. No one will die because they can't get their hands on a file of bear bile. And so it's just showing that example that bear farming is responsible for depleting these animals in the wild, showing from a conservation perspective as well as a welfare perspective. And just again getting more conservation biologists and environmentalists on side to be able to help spread that message too.
Nice. This is a bit more of a question about the bears themselves and their rehabilitation. How long does it take upon the bears accessing their new natural outdoor spaces before you begin to see the animals exhibit natural behaviour? And have there been any behaviours noticed that weren't expected?
Oh my goodness! I'm going to pass this over to Nick and Anne-Marie as well, because these guys are the experts. But I will say just one thing: the reason I'm giggling like an idiot is because, you know, with this Nanning rescue, it was the most beautiful thing to see these bears out onto grass for the first time ever, and just to see how they behaved. And there is a particular bear in particular called Pickle Nickel, who belongs to, again, our lovely ambassador Leslie Nickel, Mrs. Patmore. And Pickle Nickel, when she was released into the outside enclosure, she just swaggered up to the outside of a den holding another bear that before they were integrated together, and just peered through the bars of the den to Wilberforce. and Wilberforce just went up to the bars, and the two of them were just, you know, the connection between them, it's indescribable, to the point that she began flirting outrageously, absolutely outrageous. I mean, to the point of embarrassment, really. She started rubbing herself against the bars and rolling over with her legs open. I mean, goodness me, this was X-rated material. And then, of course, when the doors were finally open to let them integrate, you can probably guess what happened, even though, you know, we actually have to we castrate the boys because we want to rescue as many bears as we can and not have cubs running around. So I will say that, but you know, obviously something is hardwired in both of them, and they parted for China when they party for China when they were released together. So it's just one lovely, happy story about that they never had that opportunity. They never get that opportunity on a farm, and now suddenly, you know, unless they're breeding bears, and that's under horrible conditions anyway. So yeah, it's just wonderful to see that. Anyway, over to you guys. You must have a million stories.
Wow, that story, knowing the bears involved as well, is so wonderful to hear. I wish I could see for real. But Anne-Marie, chip in here. I think it's very individual in terms of their natural behaviours. There's no, I don't think it's different. It's different with every individual. They've all come from farms, but they've all had different experiences, and just like us as individuals, how they've coped with that, how they've experienced that has been different. And natural behaviours can come very quickly, and they can be out flirting like Pickle Nickel and having a wonderful time with her new lover by the sounds of things, or they can be totally terrified about even exploring an outdoor space. Actually being inside and in a confined space is actually a comfort, which is actually really sad. But I think what has always been so remarkable to me is seeing bears who've perhaps been disabled, who have got missing limbs, and their natural instinct to do things like climb trees, which you know, seeing a three-legged blind bear climb a tree is quite remarkable. But it just goes to show what some of those innate behaviours are so deep rooted, despite the trauma and experience that they've had. Anne-Marie, what about you?
Fully agree with Nick. Actually, it's very individual. So some of the things that we see early on, Jill was talking about the quarantine all these bears go into when they've been rescued, and one of the photos showed this bear with a massive mound of straw, and it's, I think, one of the first things that you generally see when they come into quarantine is when they get natural materials to interact with, that they want to eat it, they want to manipulate it, they want to build nests. So yeah, they're definitely traumatized, but I think it's one of the first I generally really seem to enjoy, and you would see in nature as well. So wild behavior, eating foraging for leaves and eating grass. So and it continues from there, but very individual. So there's no time frame that you can give for an average bear to start showing natural behaviors.
I'm appreciative that we are a bit over time, but we still have a number of questions. Are you happy, Jill, just to answer a couple more questions and then maybe we wind this up?
Sure.
Thank you. So one question was about bear farms and the number of bear bile farms. Do you know how many there are? It doesn't specify which country, but obviously it could be either country.
Yeah. In China, there's officially 69 bear farms, but we don't know the number of bears. It's many, many thousands of bears. There's not been an official indication of that for quite some years. So yeah, perhaps this is a question directed to the forestry, if they would kindly respond. And in Vietnam, we know there's less than 400 bears, and that's from the government inventory of the farms that they've been doing together with Animals Asia. We've actually asked for a new inventory because we think the number is probably closer to 300 and something now as well. So it's a manageable number in Vietnam. And again, another reason why we've agreed to build the sanctuary.
Nice. This question's just come in, but I actually think it's quite a good one, and I think it's actually quite poignant because I see that there's a couple of people on the call from Free the Bears as well. So, thank you for the amazing work in China and Vietnam. But where do you guys plan to go next after these two countries?
Oh gosh. The truth is, I think we're going to stay in China and Vietnam, and I'm so glad that Free the Bears have programs as well, you know, obviously in Cambodia and Laos. I mean, it's just, you know, hats off to you guys. You do the most phenomenal work, and, you know, we love hearing about all your news and what you've done. So, you know, it seems that between us, we've sort of taken on, you know, the countries where help is needed. Yeah, I just don't think we can look beyond China and Vietnam at the moment, because I know that our team, you know, we have thoughts about what to do when the sanctuaries are not full of bears anymore, and that's going to be probably past my lifetime, you know. But, you know, talking about some of the other animal issues in both those countries, and notably, you know, in Vietnam, we know that there's sort of pangolin issues, there's tiger issues. So yeah, you know, it's we've got plans, I think, to utilise our sanctuaries, especially as a training facility as well, for future generations. Again, long after those of us that are, you know, here have gone.
Yeah, there's plenty to be done in those countries, right? But very last question, and an interesting one as well, which I know you would have been asked before, but what role can zoos play in helping end the bear bile trade?
Yeah, we do have collaboration with some zoos, you know, who obviously have exhibits where they've rescued confiscated bears in various countries, and in terms of the public education programs as well. So, you know, it's obviously the education side is fundamentally important to bringing bear farming to an end. So, yeah, it's just good that those, you know, there's some really good zoos out there that do those education programs. There's Detroit Zoo, for example. There's Oakland Zoo in the US. And of course, I'm probably, you know, you guys can be talking about zoos in the UK, which I'm not very au fait with. You know, these are responsible zoos, I will say, you know, that don't sort of engage into perpetual breeding for breeding's sake and, you know, take more confiscated animals as well. I think that's the main thing. I think the whole sort of zoo community is looking at things differently now, and it's to be applauded, to be recognised as both rescue centres and sanctuaries as well. And long may that continue, because that's where I think greater collaboration is going to be attained through the community to work together.
Thanks, Jill. Thank you everybody as well for amazing questions. And if there is any that are left unanswered or we've missed, we can get them to Jill and get them answered for you. But a wonderful presentation, some wonderful images. And yes, there is lots of grey hair. Hair dye is the way forward. So yeah. Thanks Jill, always. Thank you for your time and everything that you do as well.
Thank you guys, we miss you. Thank you very much.
When those borders are open, we'll be back. All right, thank you everybody.
Thanks everyone, and thanks so much, Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys, thank you so much.
Have a good day.